please welcome to the stage AERA Executive Director, Felice Levine.
Wow, this is just enormous. And who said one couldn't come together after the COVID years? How terrific it is. It is really my great pleasure as all of your executive director for the meeting to welcome all of you to the 2024 AERA annual meeting. And to open this plenary, we are so excited that we are back in the city of sibling love. For the first time since 2014, our language has changed, our understandings have changed, our values have matured, and that will continue to be the case as we move on as a field and we hope as a society in the years to come. The buzz in the meeting room, day one, was so exciting in the hallways, a testament to the vision and commitment of President Tyrone Howard, who we will hear from soon. Well, program co-chairs, Javon Hunter. Javon, please stand up. Linda Tillman. Whoa. And only in alphabetical order because last but not least, Rima Reynolds-Vassar. Whoa. It's not easy to lead the Presidential Program Committee. There's a lot to sort through, a lot of yeses, a lot of nos, and a lot of couldn't you do this to really link to the theme. In developing a meeting theme that resonates deeply with the major issues of facing our research field and surrounding practices and policies, congratulations, and really our heartfelt thank you for what you've done and everything you've achieved. The spirit of this gathering and a foundational value of the education research community is inclusion and support for all individuals and groups of diverse backgrounds, methodologies, arenas of inquiry, and the success of AERA and our annual meeting depends upon that shared commitment. It's a commitment to open dialogue and free expression of ideas. I thank you all for coming year after year, to publishing in our journals, to convening at our forums, and to being part of a community that always leans forward with shared values and commitments. This opening plenary is a special event. Of course, it's special to have our lecturer, Kimberly Crenshaw, a pioneering scholar whose work on critical race theory and race and gender intersectionalities has changed the way over many decades our field examines and assesses issues of race, equity, and justice, as this meeting will underscore in both her lecture and in her conversation with President Tyrone Howard. It is now really my pleasure to not give the longer introductions that you will hear and the more heartfelt biographical understandings of Professor Tyrone Howard in the presidential address, but I want to turn this podium over to my dear colleague, collaborator, and president, Dr. Tyrone Howard, a leading scholar somewhere, a leading scholar of sociology of schools, teacher education, the education of Black boys, urban education, and educational equity. In addition to being the Pritzker Family Endowed Chair at the School of Education and Information Studies at UCLA, Dr. Howard is the director of the UCLA's Pritzker Center for Strengthening Children and Families and director of the UCLA Center for the Transformation of Schools. Just as important, he has served as mentor and inspirational leader for countless scholars, all throughout our country and many other countries where he has added his value commitments, his research, and his understandings of a pathway forward. I am pleased to welcome to the lectern my friend, co-host, colleague, and boss for the year, he would say another 4 days, Tyrone Howard. Thank you.
Whoa. Good evening, Philadelphia. Come on, y'all, I got to feel you. Good evening, Philadelphia. All right. Where are my Philadelphia folks at? Who's from Philly out here? Front and center, okay. It is my sincere honor. Talk about standing room only. Y'all shown out today. This is, give yourselves a hand. This is beautiful, right? This is beyond beautiful. I am just, I'm like geeked. I could hardly sleep last night. I kept waiting, I hope somebody shows up. I hope somebody shows up. Y'all showed up, and now Professor Crenshaw is going to show out. So I can't say how much it is an honor and a privilege to be here as part of AERA 2024. Let me say that again, AERA 2024, here in the city of brotherly love and sisterly affection. Can we say that? I can't wait to have our guest of honor come up, but before we do, we will have a land acknowledgement, and I want to introduce you to the person who will be providing our land acknowledgement. We are pleased to have joining us for our annual meeting land acknowledgement, Dr. Ann Dappis. Dr. Dappis serves on the council and is a clan mother for the League of the Lenape Nation of Pennsylvania. She is also a member of our academic community. She received a PhD from the Graduate School of Education at the University of Pennsylvania and has taught or served as an administrator at a number of different universities, including the University of Pennsylvania, Widener University, Penn State University, Abington, and Goddard College. She has taught social sciences, philosophy, and Native American studies, and her cross-cultural and interdisciplinary research has been reported in professional journals, books, and academic presentations regionally, nationally, and internationally. Dr. Dappis served as a fellow at the Coolidge Research Colloquium and Princeton in Asia, served as director of the Institute of Values Inquiry, and is director of the Education and Research for T.K. Wolf Incorporated, a nonprofit American Indian organization. She also consults with the University of Pennsylvania on Native American programs, working with Native American students and alumni in the Greenfield Intercultural Center. We are honored to have Dr. Dappis with us this evening. Please join me in welcoming her to the stage, please.
Here is the statement of the Lenapehoking Conference. We recognize and acknowledge that the 2024 AERA annual meeting is being held on the ancestral homelands of the Lenape people, the original inhabitants of Delaware, New Jersey, Eastern Pennsylvania, and Southern New York. Their descendants today include the Delaware Tribe and Delaware Nation of Oklahoma, the Nanticoke Lenni Lenape, Ramapo Lenape, Powhatan Lenape of New Jersey, and the Munsee Delaware of Ontario, Canada. We honor and respect the enduring relationship that exists between these peoples and nations in this land, and commit to building a more inclusive and equitable space for all. So this is a group of people who do education and research. Here's a story. Native students at the University of Pennsylvania are welcomed by Lenape as they come to school. Students learn that they are from equally important tribes and places, and that they are part of indigenous peoples from around the world. They are welcomed by the Greenfield Intercultural Center, its director, Valerie DeCruz, and staff. It's called Home Away from Home and Grandma's House. Some students have become participants in the Campus Minority Council, I was pleased one day, some 14, 15 years ago, to see a draft that two students, Megan Redshirt and Paul Gar, wanted me to review. It talked about Lenapehoking, the land sacred to the Lenape people. It was taken to the campus chaplain, Dr. Charles Howard, who decided to use it in baccalaureate services. And so it has been. Every baccalaureate since then has had a graduating native read the words, reminding parents and the university president, the provost, the chaplain, guest speakers, and other dignitaries, reminding them gently that Penn sits on the land where the Lenape lived their lives, spoke their language, and held their ceremonies. I can still see Paul, Megan, and a grandson of mine as they read the words and the look on the parents' faces. At the time, we knew nothing of land acknowledgements. I was a little surprised when I first saw one. There's a problem that they acknowledge tribes, who were removed from their lands. Textbooks said there was only one Lenape left, Lenape Hannah. Lenape who remained here tell stories of hiding, being afraid to vote, working to look and act like the Europeans so they wouldn't be exposed. There were ways they could quietly recognize each other. Part of my family remained in Pennsylvania and part went to Missouri and Oklahoma. Letters between them showed it was clear there were still Lenape in Pennsylvania. The land acknowledgement I read at the beginning today has no federally recognized tribes living in Lenapehoking, despite the statement of an enduring relationship that exists between these peoples and nations of this land. The New Jersey tribes are included, but they are state recognized, comprised of the people who stayed and hid. They have none of the benefits, also none of the history of boarding school abuse and death when they were removed. After much discussion, the Lenape Nation of Pennsylvania has applied for state recognition. We are actively engaged in education of all kinds in Pennsylvania. We have 4 or 5 ongoing classes of the Lenape language via Zoom. We celebrate ceremonies that were once common. Our required documentation of Lenape ancestry for membership also provides us with photos and letters showing our history. We have a cultural center with knowledgeable chiefs in charge. One of the criticisms of the land acknowledgements is that they're all words and no action by non-natives. In response to that, we work with volunteers and educate many groups. And we work to invite all Lenape back to our land and plan meetings accordingly. In any given day, we're in contact with people in different Lenape tribes and locations. Finally, a common statement in the Indian world is that we are all related, and all extends beyond the 2-leggeds to the 4-leggeds, those that crawl, fly, and swim. A prayer says that we are to walk softly on our mother, the earth. The land is sacred to us. As a Lenape, I welcome you to Lenapehoking and wish you a good conference. Wunishi, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that land acknowledgement, Dr. Dapis. Next, I would like to bring out Mr. Nasir Pittman, who will provide us with a Black labor and land acknowledgement.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, and members of the AERA community. My name is Nasir Pittman, and I'm a graduate of Boys Latin High School of Philadelphia, and I am now a junior at Temple University. And I am also the first male captain of the dance team, which is now fourth in the nation. It is both an honor and a privilege to address you tonight. As we gather in Philadelphia, it's imperative that we acknowledge the significant contributions made by enslaved Africans whose forced labor helped build this city and nation. Their resilience, sacrifices, and unwavering spirit amidst unimaginable hardships, which have left an indelible mark on our history. We must recognize the profound injustice and atrocities inflicted upon them and commit to amplifying their voices, stories, and legacies. By meeting here today, let us collectively strive for justice, equity, and a future where dignity of all people is upheld. In acknowledging this painful past, we are called to confront the ongoing impact of systematic racism and inequality, and to work towards a more just and inclusive society for all. I want to extend gratitude to all the scholars working to produce asset-based narratives within their scholarship, and thank you for normalizing truth-telling in academia when it is in your power to do so that students like me can live in their truth. All right. And to all assembled under my voice, thank you again. Have an entertaining and yet productive conference. And to finish this out, go Owls.
Thank you so much.
Whoa. A lot of talent, a lot of intellect, a lot of wisdom. Before I bring out our keynote speaker, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the dedication and the work of my amazing program chairs who have been just tireless. Can we show a loud, just a whole bunch of love for Drs. Javon Hunter, Dr. Rima, Dr. Linda Tillman. They have been phenomenal. Can we show them a big round of applause? Thank you. Could not do this without them. All right, y'all ready? Now, y'all really ready? All right, let's do it. I'm gonna read this bio. The bio doesn't do Dr. Crenshaw any justice, but I'm gonna do it nonetheless. We are thrilled tonight to have you here to hear from a leading intellectual and a champion of social justice. Kimberly Crenshaw is a pioneering scholar and writer on civil rights, critical race theory, Black feminist legal theory, and race and racism and the law. Professor Crenshaw is the co-founder and the executive director of the African American Policy Forum, a think tank that connects academics, activists, and policymakers to promote efforts to dismantle structural inequality. She also serves as the Isidore and Seville Sulzbacher Professor of Law at Columbia Law School and a distinguished professor of law in the Promise Institute Chair in the Human Rights at UCLA Law School. See, when you can be an academic at two places, two different parts of the country, that tells you how bad you are, right? And they know that you're working at both places. You know, sometimes you got to keep one job away from the other job. You can't tell them that anyway, I digress. When you got two jobs and they know you got two jobs and they okay with you having two jobs, okay? I digress. Some of us got 12 jobs and we keep all them apart, but I'm not gonna go down that route. Professor Crenshaw is a widely cited scholar whose writing has appeared in the Harvard Law Review, the Yale Law Review, the National Black Law Journal, the Stanford Law Review, and the Southern California Law Review. She is the author of #SayHerName, Black Women's Stories. That's right, show some love. She is the author of hashtag Say Her Name, Black Women's Stories of Police Violence and Public Silence, and co-author of Black Girls Matter, Pushed Out, Over-Policed, and Underprotected. Professor Crenshaw received her JD from Harvard Law School and her LLM from the University of Wisconsin Law School. In her lecture tonight, titled Fighting Back to Move Forward, Defending the Freedom to Learn in the War Against Woke, she will outline how extremists have weaponized critical race theory in their war on woke, a dog whistle campaign that has functioned to impair public education, erase history, circumscribe freedom of expression, and roll back the modest gains of the civil rights movement. I will join Professor Crenshaw in a conversation following her lecture. Please join me in giving a warm AER welcome to the stage, Professor Kimberly Crenshaw.
Okay, before we get started, can I ask you to do something that people ask me to do a lot? Can we take a selfie? All right. All right. Thank you. AERA Philadelphia, how exciting this is. I'm so thrilled to be with you. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time. You'll know why in a minute or two. So first of all, I want to thank my colleague, Tyrone Howard, the entire team here for allowing me this opportunity to be in community with you all, especially at this particular time in our history. I don't have to tell you that we're in a time of crises, not only with respect to education, but with respect to American democracy itself. So the critical circumstances under which we find ourselves, I just don't think we can overstate it. We who are in the business of knowledge production now live in institutions that are under assault. We're accused of promoting ideas that are too dangerous to be taught, too divisive to be uttered, too scandalous for children to hear, too corrosive for young adults to engage. Entire fields of study that were created when the gates to higher education were pried open by some of us and by generations ahead of us are now being gentrified. Our ideas are being distorted and our work is being censored. We are the casualties of a violently politicized nostalgia for the past. A time when confronting the legacies of white supremacy in our nation was framed as radically anti-American. Making America great again means returning to a time when widespread inequality was normalized and defended across every central institution in our society: the government, the market, the arts, the sciences, religion, and of course, education. No arena of American life was untouched by the foundational idea about who this country was built for. An idea enforced by law that made whiteness a condition for membership. It is a testament to the faith in things yet unseen that until recently, these ideologies have at least formally been repudiated. That we as a society are on a trajectory away from an ugly past to a fully realizable, multiracial, democratic future has been stated as a consensus value. There are, of course, deep tensions playing out in debates about whether the remaining inequalities are artifacts of that ugly past or just their features of human difference. Debates about where inequality rested, whether in culture, choices, family formation, and the like distinguished conservatives from liberals. But still, the consensus is that we've been on an upward trajectory away from our troubled origins until recently. Now we see a repudiation of this idea in the longing for a past which is embedded in the great again fantasy. We see this with its celebration of very fine people among the ranks of Nazis, Christian nationalists, unreconstructed white supremacists, and their political enablers. This has quickened the high-stepping extremist faction in America to seize a victory against the entire democratic apparatus. This is their war against woke. It is not a battle for the next election. It's a battle for the next century. Their effort to render the realities of social injustice literally unspeakable robs us of the capacity to name and historicize our current realities. And there is a point to this. If you cannot name something, you cannot transform it. A name can engender the power to see, as in the names they want to demolish, like intersectionality and critical race theory. Or a name can embed the power to unsee, as in the case of demonizing wokeness. Of course, none of their success this far was inevitable. Erasing history, suppressing the knowledge that generations have borne witness to is a daunting task, even for the extraordinarily well-resourced, well-organized, and well-defended juggernaut that is the anti-education cabal. In 2020, history, it seemed, had laid bare the fabricated dimensions of a so-called colorblind society. The twin pandemics of COVID and police violence opened a window into the continued blight of racism that shapes the lives and the deaths of racially marginalized people. And in the aftermath of the largest mass demonstration in American history, following the murder of George Floyd, there was a majoritarian movement for racial justice. In fact, as Nicole Hannah-Jones has noted, 1 out of 10 Americans took part in the Black Lives Matter protests. 7 out of 10 Americans said they had a conversation about racial injustice in their own household. And crucially, almost half of Republicans said that race was a primary obstacle to Black advancement. At least for that moment in time, there was a broad recognition that structural racism remained unfinished business, an impediment to a multiracial democracy. The thought that only a few years later, the very concept of structural racism and its far more palatable embodiment in the catch-all diversity, equity, and inclusion would face the very real possibility of being hounded out of the public sphere, legislated out of existence, seemed a distant and unlikely possibility. But here we find ourselves, in a blink of an eye, fighting for the existence of knowledge that is key to our survival as a nation and to humanity itself. I know it's personal for me. Watching the appropriation of words that I've deployed to convey meaning, like CRT, or to offer an interpretive prism, like intersectionality, being strategically manipulated to demonize any and all forms of anti-racism and social justice discourse is surreal. In a world of post-truth, every guardrail that we may have believed in has been overrun. There are no constraints at any level against the cranking up of disinformation or attempts to prosecute these efforts. Every day, it seems, a new version of the same distortion reaches my inbox. Let me share one that showed up today while I was coming here. Hi, Ms. Crenshaw. My name is Ellie. I'm a journalist and producer at Fox Business. Wanted to send over an excerpt from my boss, Charlie Gasparino's new book called Go Woke, Go Broke, where you're mentioned for your awareness. Quote, they also needed to accept the theory known as intersectionality, a belief system promoted by the far-left civil rights attorney Kimberly Crenshaw, that individuals don't really exist. People are merely the sum of their oppressed parts, so government can properly dole out reparations proportionate to past discrimination, unquote. Thanks, and let me know if you'd like to comment. I'd like to comment, all right. But I know that if I start commenting on everything, I won't stop. But let me just say a few words to this Mr. Charlie. First, you wouldn't recognize a far-left civil rights attorney if your life depended on it. Whatever work you think you are doing with your labels rather than with analysis reveals the fingerprints of the old school McCarthyist scare tactics. Been there, done that. Second, your 8th grade reading level is embarrassing. You would get a failing grade in any class on intersectionality that anyone who could read on a junior high school level could teach. There is hardly a meritocratic standard imaginable that this drivel would meet. The fact that your faction has weaponized DEI to mean didn't earn it should be a further embarrassment. When one considers the underwhelming literacy, or let's say illiteracy, of those who claim to be intellectually and morally superior to the hordes of woke acolytes, if there's any turning the world on its head, it is the installation of zealots like you to be the arbiters of anything. The fact that some of you now sit as trustees and have replaced legitimate educational content with right-wing edutainment is evidence of how vulnerable we are to the exercise of sheer political power, ill-informed and proud of it. But I digress. My goal in the time I have here is not to go entirely into and onto the anti-woke cabal. I got plenty to say about them, but my more pressing concern is how did we get here? Why are we here? And what awaits us if we do not rise to this challenge? So I'm going to take a quick journey. Consider this a mini tour through the Anti-Woke Museum. So, what is anti-wokeism? And why has it taken up residence in education? Anti-wokeness is a powerful container, an ideological tank rolling through our communities on a seek and destroy mission against ideas and practices that convey democratic inclusion and a history of struggle. Ideas born in the aspirations for a more equitable society and for a multiracial democracy. Assault on public education is in overdrive, and the defense, our defense, is just getting its boots on. This is made even more poignant as it's occurring during the 70th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education, and importantly, the 60th anniversary of Freedom Summer, both of which were grounded in the recognition that there couldn't be a functioning democracy where there existed a segregated and inequitable education system. Beginning with attacks on CRT, anti-racism, wokeness, and now DEI, the goal of this well-organized and well-funded faction is to erase the legacy of democratizing movements that brought us the civil rights, women's rights, workers' rights, LGBTQ rights, and voters' rights movements. So where did this start? After viewing an interview of Christopher Rufo on Fox News, President Trump issued Executive Order 13950 in September of 2020, banning diversity and inclusion training in the federal government and with all of its contractors. He would later proclaim that, quote, getting critical race theory out of our schools is not just a matter of values, it's also a matter of national survival. One that may require patriots to, quote, lay down their very lives to do so. And this paranoia was flamed by the right-wing media. Up until June 2020, Fox had only ever mentioned CRT 3 times since it was founded in 1989. By the middle of 2021, it had been mentioned 901 times. It's important to note also that it was barely mentioned by the other networks and the paper of record until the extremist right decided to weaponize it. No wonder no one knew what it was. And this strategy, planting an extremist piece of disinformation and rehashing it repeatedly until the mainstream media picks it up with its irresponsible both sidesism, would be perfected to use against Harvard's president, Claudine Gay. Although President Biden rescinded this order on his first day, the Red Wall campaign was already underway with states passing and introducing anti-CRT legislation. It was the gateway to Don't Say Gay, attacks on tenure, DEI, and other equity-focused practices. The bone-chilling effects were immediately felt by educators nationwide. Since then, we have heard an unending stream of horror stories about how CRT promotes racial division, demonizes white people, is the default ideology of a federal bureaucracy run by guilt-ridden liberals. So, what's behind these 3 letters that sparked this witch hunt? Let's start with what CRT actually is. The study and recognition of how and why laws and policies that are supposedly colorblind still produce racially inequitable outcomes. A far cry from what the faction that is attacking racial inclusion wants people to believe. But let's take their word for it for a moment, that there are people who are undermining our security, imposing a radical worldview on unsuspecting citizens, dividing us, indoctrinating our children with false histories, peddling in race hate, and heaping innocent people with debilitating shame. If this is what these people are doing, doesn't it behoove us to know who they are? There may be some lurking here. Shall we find out? All right. So join me in figuring out who are the CRT folks in the room. Those of you who are able, and I see some of you are comfortably on the floor, but those of you who are able, please stand. We're going to do a quick test, and this is call and response with your body, so I really mean it. So we're going to do a test, and it's simple. It's really simple. I'm going to give you 5 scenarios with an A or a B answer. Listen carefully. Sit down if you choose answer A. Keep standing if your answer is B. We clear? Sit down if it's A. Keep standing if it's B. All right, let's start. You are called to a brainstorming meeting to present some new pitches for business. An African-American colleague of yours, Keisha, raises a new idea that she's been thinking through for a number of weeks. Keisha's idea not only solves a marketing problem, but expands the mission of the company in a creative way. Keisha's contribution is entirely dismissed, almost as if she hadn't said it. But 20 minutes later, Karen and Ken say exactly the same thing. The supervisor acts as though Karen and Ken are the second coming, and he immediately installs them in a managerial role to supervise Keisha in executing her idea. Now, A, sit down if you think Keisha probably didn't speak clearly enough, presenting a jumbled or incoherent idea. Keep standing if you think this is a textbook example of the implicit biases that routinely undervalue and overlook the superior performances of people of color, women, and other socially marginalized groups at work. All right, let's keep going. You hear on the news that a famous Oscar-winning Black actor has been detained in Manhattan for shoplifting a sandwich in a bodega. Sit down if your first thought is, tisk, tisk, tisk. Even the wealthy Black people aren't above stealing a sandwich. If you think B, that class is not an automatic prophylactic against being racially profiled and falsely accused in a New York corner store, then keep standing. Okay, so let me check in. How are folks doing? You want to run a couple more, see if we can sort out some of these critical race theory people? All right, this one ought to get you. You read in the newspaper that a Black couple gets their home appraised after making substantial improvements in a seller's market. The appraiser values their home at less than what they invested in it. After they take down their photos of their Black family, remove their artwork, their textiles, every other indicator of their Blackness from their walls, their white friend posing as the homeowner is giving an appraisal that is almost $300,000 more. If you think, A, there must have been some kind of clerical error by the appraisers, sit down. If you think, B, this is a classic example of how discrimination in the housing market continues to diminish Black wealth, keep standing. All right, after the video of the killing of George Floyd surfaces, you hear countless Black parents who have sat down to give their kids the talk. Sit down if A, you think this is an odd time to give kids the talk about the birds and the bees. Keep standing if you know that the talk is a difficult conversation that Black parents must give to help their children survive in a world in which they may encounter punishment and violence because of who they're seen to be. All right, this is the last one. It's make or break. I think this is especially relevant for the educators in the room. You learned that less than 10% of the graduating seniors in your district can correctly identify slavery as the cause of the Civil War. Sit down if you think, A, well, this is exactly as it should be. The war wasn't about slavery, it was about states' rights. Stay standing if you believe that this is an example of the ignorance about how resorting to violence to uphold a racist way of life brought our nation to its knees in the past and continues to be a clear and present danger to our nation in the present, one that public education can and should address. So I want you to look around and take stock. I'm not sure if what I'm about to tell you is good or bad news for you, but if you're still standing, either it's congratulations or condolences. The next time you look in the mirror, you are looking at a critical race theories. Have a seat. So The point of our little exercise here is that critical race theory is not a top-down foreign set of ideas, but a homegrown, bottom-up practice of racial literacy about the continuous ways that race shapes our social world. It is a necessary prism to understand how a racially unjust status quo continues to exist even in the face of colorblind laws, and that stretches from law to politics to policies, from economics and culture. This is knowledge. It is knowledge homegrown, it's knowledge discovered, it's knowledge that's fashioned. But this is the knowledge that's been the target of law to impose a particular viewpoint against it, usually the most difficult kind of law to justify. But conservatives have modeled copycat legislation everywhere to chill honest engagement about Americans' history, about many of the issues that we just talked about, by utilizing buzzwords like white discomfort, parents' rights, both sides, neutrality. For example, North Dakota's newly minted edict precludes instruction that indicates that racism is not merely the product of learned individual bias or prejudice. In other words, you can only teach racism as bias or prejudice. Now, this prohibits teaching about structural racism, implicit bias, market-based discrimination. We wouldn't be able to learn about housing segregation, wealth disparity, health disparity, algorithmic biases, even predatory policing. Disparate impact doctrine, the actual legal rule that prohibits the use of policies and practices that disproportionately burden protected groups, is on the chopping block. This is the kind of thing that can't be taught because obviously racism is not just about prejudice. Let's consider some other things we've seen across the country. Florida prohibits materials that make any individual, quote, feel discomfort, guilt, anguish on the count of his or her race. This has been used to challenge teaching the story of Ruby Bridges, the 6-year-old who took desegregation on her little shoulders to desegregate New Orleans school districts. They're saying that her story cannot be taught because it tells the story that white people hate black people. Oklahoma prohibits teaching any idea that, quote, current generations bear any responsibility for the actions of their ancestors, which of course shuts down conversations about reparations, about redistributive justice, and of course, about the Tulsa race riot. In fact, one administrator in Oklahoma interpreted the ban to prohibit teaching that the Tulsa riot was a race riot. New Hampshire's law created a hotline for aggrieved parents to report teachers who violated their anti-CRT law. Moms for Liberty stoked this flame by offering $500 for anyone who would report a teacher violating the law. And teachers have borne the brunt of this vigilantism. Teachers like Matthew Hahn in Tennessee, who lost his job for assigning a piece by Ta-Nehisi Coates. Other educators who've run afoul of anti-woke anxieties and lost their jobs include James Whitfield in Texas, Amy Donofrio in Florida, and now in at least a half dozen bills introduced recently, aggrieved parents, students, and even ordinary citizens have the right to sue schools and recover damages in courts for those in violation of these anti-CRT rules. So the exercise that I just gave might be subject to precisely this kind of punishment in these states. And this is an important thing to remember. This is not just a red state problem. CRT Forward reports that these laws impact nearly half of all American students. That's nearly 25 million students going to school now in districts that limit what can be taught about our history. And that doesn't include private school children whose parents also received a deluge of material against wokeism. 23 states now have these kinds of laws, and even more school districts in blue states. Now, under these constraints, it's difficult to safely teach even Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail, which includes elements of all of these prohibited concepts. One can only wonder why this magnificent document, once a core text in the AP African American Studies course, has now been removed from required readings. And while we're on the College Board, I couldn't close without saying a little something about that. So last year, when the College Board attempted to excise intersectionality from its AP African American Studies curriculum, because in their words, it had been, quote, compromised by disingenuous voices and was, quote, no longer effective, having been drained of its meaning and filled up with political rhetoric, I wanted to ask, drain of meaning by and for whom? If all terms can be censored from a college-level curriculum simply because they've been used politically and have been contested, then the College Board ought not to include liberalism, populism, freedom, culture, even democracy in their curriculum. When we acquiesce to the elimination of words because opponents have tried to redefine or misconstrue their meaning, we allow power politics, rather than the pursuit of knowledge, to dictate the content of our courses. But this is why the anti-woke cabal wants to silence these ideas, because ideas make a difference. They make a difference in the lives of the members of the Say Her Name Mothers Network, a group of women close to my heart at the center of the Say Her Name movement. These are women who have lost their daughters, sisters, and mothers to anti-Black police violence, and they had to suffer what we call the loss of the loss. Intersectionality names that loss. It finds the place where the assumptions about who is a victim of anti-Black police violence slips out of our consciousness because we don't have a way of drawing the intersections between anti-Black violence and violence against women. These concepts make a difference, which is why there's an organized cabal to take them away. The anti-woke attack, of course, is much broader than this. Look at the ways in which courses such as sociology, ethnic studies, gender studies have been defamed and defunded in states such as Florida, and in the ways that other states now are primed to follow that lead. These efforts represent the perfect storm, one which was accelerated by the dismantling of affirmative action by a radically conservative Supreme Court. This was made possible by one core idea. It's an old idea, but it's a vibrant idea, that anti-racism is discrimination against white people. That diversity, equity, and inclusion is a zero-sum game. Allowing people of color equal rights deprives white people of their rights. All of these ideas are not new, but they're being rehashed and reimposed by the law as a part of a war on woke, which aims to silence our voices, erase our stories, and diminish our civil rights gains. Now, I could go on, but I think you have a picture of what we're up against. The question I'd like to raise for us here is, what were its conditions of possibility? Why were we not fortified enough to withstand this onslaught? How can we strengthen ourselves for the road ahead? The first thing that I've noted was that in the initial attack on the 1619 Project, on CRT, and on other anti-racist projects, there was barely a sigh elicited from many stakeholders. I call this the "what you mean we" problem. Sometimes it comes up as, I don't teach CRT. Additionally, some race scholars and others who downplay the attack on DEI argue that DEI is sometimes done badly. Technically, it's true, nobody was teaching CRT in K-12 if it comes to the course that's based on the Red Book, and I would have known about it. And DEI is sometimes done badly, but just like anything else, it's sometimes done badly. The reality is that the anti-woke assault wasn't about fidelity to a CRT course, whether you were actually teaching something called CRT. It's whether you were teaching critical consciousness about race and racism. That's what they were after. And they told us that's what they were coming after. It's not this course or that course, this DEI program or that DEI program. They're coming after the entire enchilada, the whole project. Second, too many of our political appointees, elected officials, and leaders believed that this was basically simply a distraction from the real issue. As though there can be a real issue apart from our ability to name, analyze, and address it. The many gaps between our creed and our reality need articulation in order for us to be able to mobilize against it. Now, I sometimes call this the asbestos problem, unrecognized. We know that our institutions have been created with toxic materials in the walls, in the ceilings, on the floor that cause us harm. Now, when we care about those harms, when we care about the people who are impacted by those harms, we value those who know how to go in and get that stuff out. We pay people to come and figure out where in our ceilings is the toxic material. We encourage people to learn to find the toxicity. We think it's seriously important to make our institutions whole and healthy. So if we care about Black lung disease, it would make no sense to say that the cure to those diseases is to be asbestos blind, to neither see nor hear nor speak about asbestos, to point the finger at the first person who says, I think there might be an asbestos problem here, as the source of the asbestos problem. But that is exactly what is being imposed on us. The problem is that this gap in understanding about what needs to happen, what knowledge we need, is what allows the attack on us to be seen not as an attack on all of us. So the problem is that there is a gap. There's a gap between what we do and what our counterparts do. There's a gap between what we are offering and a gap between what the communities out of which we come understand. And there's a gap between the supporters of academic freedom and those who are dismantling our institutions and are willing to foot the bill. And I have to throw lawyers in the mix. There are some problems with the lawyers as well. The fact, for example, that we accepted for far too long a vision of diversity that was a thin version of the anti-racist, anti-subordinationist vision of affirmative action when it was first instituted. In the infamous Bakke case, affirmative action was justified as a way to address the underserved populations, which are still mostly served by people who look like them, to address societal discrimination, to address educational discrimination, and to integrate the medical profession. These were the justifications that the Supreme Court repudiated. Those were not good enough reasons for affirmative action. The justification that they accepted was the university's academic freedom to constitute a class, a diverse class. Now, look, there are plenty of opportunities since that case to go deeper into the cause and the justification for affirmative action. Justice Powell offered in that case that if traditional criteria effectively discriminate against certain populations, then that is a justification for affirmative action. And it's not preferential treatment, it's equitable treatment. But in that old phrase that if it ain't broke, why fix it? Too many of us thought, well, diversity is working. It's thin, but it's working. So why do we go any deeper? Now that diversity is broken, our task is to put it back together again with these objectives now reintegrated into our understanding. So it shouldn't be a surprise that our backs are against the wall, especially in higher education. We were destined to be a target after all. Education has been one of the most significant prophylactics against the anti-democratic authoritarianism and ultimately against fascist elements in our society. They were bound to come for us. We should have been ready. And now, with Project 2025, Heritage Foundation's platform for action, we are reaching a new level of threat. They're now mobilizing in a coordinated fashion to ensure that when they seize power again, which may happen, Project 2025 will go for the kill. They will prevent the Equal Opportunity Commission from collecting data on race and ethnicity. They will try to eliminate disparate impact legal theory. They will cut protections for employees from discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. They would redirect the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice to prioritize violations of white civil rights. And to go even further, Stephen Miller, one of the main backers of Project 2025, has openly been discussing his plans to encourage law enforcement to arrest teachers who violate anti-CRT bans. Does this sound familiar to you? They plan to push through these policies by firing thousands of federal employees in the civil service and replacing them with political appointees that are pre-vetted MAGA loyalists. And just in case you think this is a hyperbole, I just want to remind you about the Contract of America, a blueprint for the Reagan administration that imposed budget cuts and other policies, 70% of which went into effect. Even if a quarter of Project 2025 happens, our democracy will sustain terminal damage. So, what is there for us to do? I have no magic bullets here. I know many of us are trying to fight, and doing so loudly and together in a more coordinated, coherent fashion is a way forward. The only guarantee is that if we don't fight, we will lose. There's no doubt about that. So how do we fight? Where do we fight? When? We clearly have to fight against censorship in our institutions. And for that, all of us who are part of faculties have faculty senates and other places to draw the line in the sand. We need to get there before they do. Faculty have to use the power we have before we don't have it. And we can't wait in hopes that political appointees will save us, nor will board members or trustees, as we saw with Claudine Gay at Harvard. The equation has to be changed on the ground. If nothing happens when our colleagues are thrown under the bus, if there is no cost, if there's no disruption, then there's no incentive not to meet the demands of the moment. And at the moment, the demands seem to be for accommodation rather than fight for our freedom. As academics, researchers, practitioners, it's important that we demystify what we do for our populations related to the communities we serve. At AAPF, we have for 5 years now offered CRT summer school to parents, students, activists, practitioners, faith leaders, and others, democratizing access to various forms of literacy to better understand the world we are in is the route to saving democracy writ large. Anti-racism and democracy are intertwined. We cannot save one without the other. And so for this, we can't appease, concede, or acquiesce. Make no mistake, a society that rewards capitulation and lying more than it values truth and transparency is a society that cannot right its own wrongs. Finally, we have to defend the freedom to learn, not just against the DeSantises of the world, but against the moderate enablers who are willing to accommodate censorship to increase their profits. When the College Board bent the knee to Florida, it sent a message that right-wing heckling could determine the syllabus for Black studies. We've seen this before, when national chains would accommodate segregation in the South while integrating their lunch counters in the North. It was Adam Clayton Powell who said, "No, we are not advocating Negroes in the South to refuse segregation. We are advocating Americans everywhere to refuse segregation." And that means not accommodating and pressuring all institutions to do what they must do wherever we are. That means no apartheid segregation, no apartheid education, no education in one state that doesn't tell the truth about our history and another state that does. In this spirit, it is how we want to come together as a Freedom to Learn network. That network is responding by organizing for a second National Day of Action, May 3rd, bringing together stakeholders across racial justice, education, human rights to fight back against this silencing. We encourage you to join us for the Freedom to Learn campaign. Commit to doing something, anything on May 3rd, whether it's reading a banned book. The majority of them now newly banned, 35% of them written by authors of color or LGBTQ authors, even though less than 5% of authors are people of color. Join us throughout the summer as we declare Freedom Summer, building to protect our multiracial democracy. Look, it's folly to assume that the storm will pass if we just try to hold it out. We've lost our way in the past, and it wasn't simply because forces of repression were too overwhelming, but because the silence and complicity of too many of us allowed an autocratic faction to alter the trajectory of our democracy. Toni Morrison cogently warned us, when other people are written out of their own narrative, their own story, their vilification abets the bottomless slide into fascism. So I sincerely want to believe that the moral arc of the universe bends towards justice, but I believe nothing is inevitable. It is people who do the bending or the unbending. We are in a U-turn, and we have to unbend that U-turn. We have to reverse this trajectory. Things that we couldn't have imagined 10 years ago barely solicit a yawn today. And if this continues, what is unimaginable today will become just the way things are in a matter of years. I look around and I'm sure, like you, we're all astonished. People who once championed free speech and academic freedom have found their exceptions. Mass punishment and inhumanity unfold as people debate whether to call the slaughter of thousands genocide. Democracy sits on life support while the media narrates its end like a horse race. Today's constraints on speaking truth to power are unfolding at a stunning pace, but there is knowledge to be brought to bear on these crises, knowledge from ancestors and ordinary people who fought to survive and to allow us to live to fight another day, and to fight responsibly. I live in full awareness of what was passed on to me a baton to run the race, to pass on to the next generation, the baton in a better field position than the last. And on this, I fear we are failing the future. And I, for one, cannot rest in this knowledge. James Baldwin once noted that ignorance aligned with power is the most ferocious enemy justice can have. So for me, my hope rests in reading our current situation with full awareness of our past and acting on what we see. It is the collective responsibility of all of us in the academy and as educators and as researchers to do just that. No U-turn. The freedom to learn is the freedom to live. Thank you.
Living in the song, singing loud and strong, moving all day long, I'm begging my freedom.
Don't leave, don't leave. We got a few minutes left. Thank you, Professor Crenshaw.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, just a couple of questions. You've given us a lot to think about, and obviously, you know, we are a community largely comprised of academics. One of the things I wanted to know if you could talk just a little bit more about is the way we have tried to structure the theme for this conference around dismantling racial injustice. What is the role of research, policy, and practice to dive deeper into dismantling some of those ideologies that you've talked about?
Yes. I might have to do this. So I can speak about it from my profession, which is the law, and historicize it a bit. Critical race theory actually comes from being in these institutions that thought themselves to be liberal, colorblind, and neutral, and had not thought about how to make space for the generations of new students who hadn't had access to these institutions, but even more importantly, how to make space for the new ideas, the new mission, the new imperatives that we were bringing into these institutions with us. I was a graduate of Africana Studies and government. I went to law school with the intention of studying with Derek Bell, trying to understand the legal apparatus behind what we had learned in Africana Studies about the political economy of race, about the sociology of race, the history of the transatlantic slave trade. How did law make all these things possible? How did it insulate and make it virtually impossible for reformist sensibilities to actually create change? And what we encountered was an institution that did not see these as legitimate academic pursuits. And we're not talking about conservatives. Right. We're talking about people who are on the board of the Legal Defense Fund, for example. So the faith that the practices, the existing research apparatus that people had were themselves free of the history out of which it came was widespread and shockingly common. So much of what we have been doing for the last 40 years has been interrogating the themes, the values, the ways in which knowledge has been distorted to open up possibilities for acknowledging that our society doesn't have to be the way it is. Law is a choice. It's not something that's given, from God. These are orientations that we came with, partly because none of us were really interested in, just being big thought thinkers. We were there to solve problems. solve problems. So I would say for us, number one, identifying the problem in the knowledge production apparatus that made it impossible to actually be trained to be of service to our own people. Then actually creating those courses. Critical race theory came from students of color saying, we're tired of asking you to give us the courses. We're going to pull our resources. We're going to identify scholars across the country who are doing this work. We're going to bring them into the institution. They're going to teach us, and we're going to get independent study credit for it. That is what created critical race theory.
So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that these attacks have seemingly had a very pointed, at times intentional, sort of focus on Black women. What advice would you give to Black women who are in these institutions and positions of leadership? You mentioned Claudine Gay, but for every one Claudine Gay, there's how many other Black women who are also targeted? What would you offer from an advice standpoint?
So they don't want us to talk. For me, number one, first and foremost, is finding your posse. Finding your posse. You cannot do this alone.
That's right.
And for me, it was important to have my posse both inside and outside of the institution because, I mean, you know, institutions will do what they can do when nobody is looking.
Right.
You got to make sure that you got a lot of people looking, a lot of people taking care. So coming to places like this, presenting work, becoming known outside of your immediate institution, they need to know that people have eyes on the situation. That's incredibly important. And, you know, I think when we code switch, we have to remember that we are code switching. You know, even though we may talk the talk, walk the walk, at the end of the day, we are still the flies in the ointment.
That's right.
And we need to know that and act accordingly. Now, to a certain extent, I don't want to give any credence to the idea that any of us is responsible for or have contributed to the attacks that happened. The reality is that Black women are attacked in part because they know they can be attacked, in part because they know there's going to be a couple moments before people will stand up and come. You know, there's not going to be the immediate protest. There's not going to be the immediate, you know, she's one of us. I learned that from, you know, Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas. You know, and I do realize that one of the consequences of the fact that Black women's histories have not been fully integrated into our solidarity agendas. That's what gave us Clarence Thomas, because so many people thought that Anita Hill was acting like a white woman.
Yeah.
How could you think that if you know the history of Black women struggling against sexual harassment and the fact that sexual harassment was a Black woman's legal theory? It was a Black woman's experience. We've been harassed since we arrived on these shores. That's part of our history, right? And because there was so little uptake, because we didn't recognize it, we were able to see an op-ed on the pages of the New York Times saying that even though Anita Hill might have been telling the truth, she was basically lying because it was just down home courting. That is what was actually said. So you have the failure to show up for Anita Hill, which gave us the most conservative Supreme Court nominee ever. We lost affirmative action because of that fifth vote, campaign finance reform because of that fifth vote. We got George Bush because of that fifth vote. I mean, we can go on and on and on. But our democracy is in this position because we didn't believe a Black woman. So not believing a Black woman isn't just about us. It's about the entire democracy.
Yeah. So you talked about we have to do a better job at demystifying our work to the larger public. So what are steps and strategies that we can continue to take so that we mount our defense but not only in the sort of the context of higher education. How do we build better collaborations with communities and organizers to make sure that the kinds of resistance that we know we have shown historically becomes manifested again?
Yeah, well, that's exactly what we've been trying to do with Freedom to Learn. That's what we've been trying to do with May 3rd. That's what we've been trying to do with Critical Race Theory Summer School, actually providing spaces for us to mutually learn with each other, passing on understanding about why it is that we can live in a society that has these formal rules, but still you're unlikely to get a loan if you live in a certain place, or you're unlikely, or the algorithm actually dictates things. Algorithms actually bring the racism of the past into the formulas for the future. Being able to explain the various ways in which the lives that we lead are not totally of our own making, but are the marking of history, or as it said, the past isn't even the past. The past walks with us. So we take this time to try to address parents so they understand. You know, we do this exercise with parents. We talk about, what do you talk about with your kids? This is precisely the stuff that they don't want you to be able to talk about in schools. It matters to your children. It matters to their well-being. It matters to their achievement to be able to see themselves in the curriculum and to be able to understand the ground that we're standing on has been created. So we tell the stories and we bring their stories in. We do oral histories and we show where those oral histories intersect with some of the major historical moments in history, from what happened with the Federal Housing Act to veterans, some Black who were not unable to actually get a mortgage, so they're not able to build wealth. There's a reason why, you know, somebody can say, my grandfather came here with nothing and now we're multimillionaires, and I can't say the same about my grandfather. Right. Historicizing it, linking it to actual life. That is part of the process of connecting, and that connection is what leads us to this political moment. For the most part, the same states and the same people that are taking away our books are taking away our votes. The two are going hand in hand, and that is how it was historically. They took away our right to vote, and they took away our schools. We are in a better position than we were in the last redemption. But that only matters if we activate. If we take the lesson from the past, realize how far back we can be pushed. It's not a fantasy that these things can happen, and bring us all into this moment so we can see the value of the things that we have, like the value of the vote, like the value of, I love it when my colleague says, don't leave any power on the table. One of the most important ways that we can do that is not think the only time we need to vote is when we hear from the parties to come and vote for the presidential election. That's one every 4 years. Elections happen every year that shape our lives far more than what happens in Washington, D.C.
That's right.
Right? So the school boards, you know, the commissioners,
Initiatives.
all of these judges, we need to be showing up there like we showed up when we were in 2008. If we had kept showing up like we showed up in 2008, half of this stuff wouldn't have happened.
Wow. Y'all hear that? Our time is almost at an end. So look, the work can be heavy. The work can be hard. And one of the things we've been talking about this conference, how do you maintain a sense of being whole? What does self-care look like for Kimberly Crenshaw? Do you watch like Real Housewives of Atlanta or something? What's your guilty pleasure that kind of gives you some sense of being able to just...
Oh man, it's so corny, but I like to garden. And you know, I like to grow food. I like to grow my own food. So I have a whole, even indoors, I have a whole garden set up. And I look forward to coming home. Like when I get back on the plane and go home, I like to go in and say, okay, who's new? Who showed up?
So look, can we talk? Because I'm a gardener too. How are your tomatoes doing right now? How are your tomatoes doing right now?
So they all sprouted, and so I had to move some of them out.
Okay.
And so some I'm doing the passive deep water culture. Some I'm doing cracky. You know, so I'm trying
Brussels sprouts for the first time. Have you done
Oh
Brussels
no,
sprouts?
that's hard.
Okay, all right. Well, look, Professor Crenshaw, I can't say thank you enough on behalf of the American Educational Research Association, how much your work has informed, influenced, and inspired so much of what we do. We have made lots of progress, but as you have told us so eloquently and so inspirationally, there's far more work to go. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Can we show another round of applause?
Thank you for having me. Thank you.